My name is Andy Johnson. I am 37 years old. I'm actually a doctor of physical therapy, and this year I will be having a bilateral hip replacement. Ooh, my story. So where to begin? The reality is my pain started in high school. I vividly remember probably my junior year in high school playing basketball. And it was after every game, once system had cooled down, I was having what I would call growing pain, kind of the front of the hip. And I remember at the time just chalking it up as a groin or adductor tendonitis with my limited of knowledge at the time. And it never really went away, and I just kind of dealt with it. Luckily, I was able to play without much pain. It was just the aftermath is when I would have trouble or pain with it. As time went on, it worsened and worsened. Once I got to college or undergrad, I wasn't playing as much. I did play some intramural basketball, was still playing a lot of tennis, and kind of the same thing. I was still mostly just having pain afterwards. Well, by the time I got to physical therapy school or grad school, the pain got pretty bad. And in fact, it was even just hurting with day-to-day activities, still deep in the groin area on both hips. So I finally decided to go get it checked out. Went and saw an ortho doc. They did some x-rays, some other imaging. And the first thing that kind of popped out to us was this idea of having femoral acetabular impingement, or FAI for short. FAI is basically where you have some bony lesions or some bony overgrowth either on the head of the femur or also on the acetabulum or the hip socket, which makes that hip socket very incongruent, which means you can start getting a lot of tearing of cartilage, maybe some labrum, etc., and obviously can create some inflammation and pain in the hip joint. And they're like, we need to go in there and clean this out to at least try to make your hips last a little bit longer. So the next thing I know, I find myself in a whirlwind of going through 3 surgeries while in PT school over a span of a year, with the goal of getting it debrided out, reshaping the bone a little bit, fixing the labrum, and really trying to make these hips last as long as they can. So I remember after the second surgery, I rehabbed, was feeling pretty good. Actually went back to playing some basketball. And I remember having a fast break, running down the court. And right before I got to the basket, I felt what I will describe as an explosion in my hip. There was an audible popping sound. It felt like something exploded in my left hip. Had severe pain with it. Immediately got back in with the doctor. And he x-rayed it, and sure enough, I had broken off a big piece of the hip socket or the acetabulum, the rim of it. We've got to go back in and clean that out and try to debride it more, or you're going to continue with some sharp pain. So then after rehabbing and getting through PT school, I was actually feeling pretty good. I was never pain-free, but I was definitely getting back to doing a lot of the things I wanted to do again, and that time was playing more tennis, and I was getting into functional fitness workouts, CrossFit type workouts, and I was able to do the things I wanted to do. By the time I hit early 30s, pain started to increase again. So over the last 5 years, pain has continued to worsen and worsen. And we've been tracking it with imaging and x-rays with ortho surgeon. And over the last couple of years, we've noticed the AVN, or the avascular necrosis, is continued to worsen. And so basically the head of my femur has been slowly dying, and also, in the surgeon's words, the head is collapsing. So avascular necrosis is essentially the cutoff of blood supply, in this case to the hip joint. So in this graphic, you can see how the blood supply gets to the hip. And this blood supply could be cut off for many different reasons. A lot of times it's due to trauma, like a break or a dislocation. But more commonly, it is due to wear and tear and possibly some genetic factors over time. And this was the case for my hip, more of a genetic factor and wear and tear. And slowly, the hip joint essentially starts to die due to that lack of blood supply. Function of the hip is getting worse and worse, pain levels worse and worse. You know, at what point did it lead me to make this decision to get a bilateral hip replacement? You know, I would say over the last 2 years, I've noticed that even with day-to-day stuff, including when my daughters ask me to go on a hike or go shoot basketball in the driveway with them, normally I wouldn't hesitate or think twice about that. Now I just really hesitate, knowing I'm really going to pay for it from a pain standpoint later. Even I found myself saying no to some of those things, and that's kind of, to me, the last straw. If I'm having to say no to my kids to do an activity, then I'm not living the life I want to live anymore. And so I knew at that point it was time to make this decision. You know, one thing I will point out, I was told when I went through those 3 surgeries in my 20s, 2 things. One, the surgeon said, man, you have the hips of a 65-year-old. And as a 20-year-old, that's nothing you want to hear, obviously. But then the second piece, which really hit home with me more, was he said, you know, by the time you are 40 years old, probably sooner, you're going to need a bilateral hip replacement. Well, it turns out they were right. Here I am, 37 years old, and in 6 weeks, I'll be having a bilateral hip replacement. Yeah, so overall, I'm a pretty private guy. You can ask anyone who's close to me. I don't usually, like to talk about my pain or problems with other people, but also I just tend to keep things to myself. I'm introverted by nature. After talking with a good friend of mine, he kind of made it clear to me that you're going to go through this process either way. And so let's use this as a valuable educational opportunity for people that not only that I work with directly, but people out there who are going to have to go through a similar process. And coming from someone like myself who is trained in working with these type of clients, I'm hoping to bring a lot of value to people, and maybe they can learn a lot from my story, which is why I'm willing to put myself out there a little bit, share it with you guys, and hopefully it can be helpful to those who are going to go through a similar process, and maybe it's an opportunity for them to even reach out and ask questions, and hopefully I can be helpful any way I can with that.